Hey y'all, this is my power steering delete for my 2006 Mazda MX5 Miata. I said that I would go back and redo this because there's a couple things that need to be explained a little bit better for people. So this is a 2.3 out of a front wheel drive car. The 2.0, the 2.3, and the 2.5 are all basically the same engine between the MZR and the Duratec from the Ford. The difference being that the 2.0 is 11 millimeters shorter block than the 2.3 and the 2.5. 2.3 and 2.5 have the same height block. The difference being that the stroke on the 2.3 is shorter. It's a better race engine because it can rev better without vibrating itself to death. So I used to have a 2.5 in here coincidentally, but then I found out about the revving thing, whatever. So then I switched to the 2.3. Now, this is not for power because this engine technically is rated for less horsepower than the Miata 2.0, and the difference being that these engines are like 9.5 to 1 compression, whereas the Miata engine is like 10.6 or 10.8 to 1 compression. Not to mention, I think the Miatas probably have bigger cams and stuff like that, and probably a shorter intake track. I'm not sure, but regardless, I did this because when I bought these NC Miatas and decided I was going to do a race car build, come to find out back then the engines were like 800 bucks. The 2.0s were. Now they're freaking like 2,200 bucks, 2,400 bucks. So when I starved my 2.0 for fuel at Sebring in turn 17 and went and looked for a motor and it was like 2,200 bucks, I was like, crap, man. So I knew that these engines could be had for like 400 bucks. So, and these things are so abundant, they're literally everywhere, whereas a 2.0 you might have to drive 100 miles to get it. I said, let me do this switch, and of course, like, everything bolts right on. The engine mounts, the intake manifolds, all that stuff. So if you want to run your stock Miata intake manifold, you can. As you can see, I'm running the front wheel drive intake manifold, which puts the throttle body back inside of the driver compartment, which I have a whole air box and all that stuff set up inside, and a firewall essentially to keep the driver safe. But the whole purpose of this is not about power. It's about the fact that when we just went and raced in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, if I needed to go get an engine, if I had got a 2.0 engine, I would have to literally drive 57 miles and paid $2,400, whereas this engine was 6 miles from the track and it was $425. So that's the reason why I'm using this engine. You know, it makes a little less horsepower, makes a little more torque. It's good balance, and honestly, tons of fun and very abundant. So anyway, getting back to the power steering delete. This is a tensioner from, say, example, 2010 Mazda 5, the little minivan thing. It's not quite the same. This particular one is off of a 2012 Ford Fusion Hybrid, but they're basically the same. The pulleys on one engine to another may be a little bit bigger or smaller, so I'm not going to go into the belt length for what I'm using, because if you're using a 2.0, being that block is 11 millimeters shorter, then naturally the belt might be that little bit shorter as well. So I'm just going to leave the belt talk alone. I will go ahead and talk about this alternator. The alternator is from, say, an '08 and newer Mazda 5, which is like the little minivan thing. It bolts on this side of the engine versus the original one used to bolt on this side of the engine. The purpose for this is to do this short belt configuration, so it's nice and simple. These belts are like 13 bucks versus the original long one that went around for the MX5 that was very complicated because it actually had a couple extra pulleys and all that junk, and I think those belts are like 65 bucks or something like that. So this is way simple, and naturally this is meant to be like, this will bolt right onto a 2.0 engine also. You know, so if you decide that you've got just a 2.0 stock 2.0 in your car and you want to do this, you can actually bolt this alternator right into your car, right on your 2.0. I'm glad I actually thought about this. But this bottom bolt that holds the alternator on does have to be trimmed, because otherwise it will hit the steering shaft. I'm sorry, I really can't show it to you because it's just too difficult to get it down in there, but there is the steering shaft, as you can see. Where's my freaking, give me 1 second. Do this again. Let's see here. Okay, so there's the steering shaft right there. You can see the knuckle of it. You can see that bottom bolt right there. That has to be trimmed on the alternator. Unfortunately, I can't really get down there to show you, but you can still leave that bottom bolt there. It's hard to explain, but the alternator needs to be trimmed so that you can put a shorter bolt in and still keep that bolt, but that way it doesn't interfere with the steering shaft. So regardless of which alternator you go with on this particular side, it has to be trimmed. So I unfortunately made the mistake and didn't realize that I had to have this specific alternator for this car. Now this specific alternator has a darker, almost black, ovalish style connector. The reason being is that the other style alternator that fits on this side bolts on just the same, but has a lighter gray, almost rectangular plug. I believe that particular alternator has an internal regulator, whereas I think this particular alternator is controlled by the computer of the car. So I just needed to cover that. The one that you need for the MX5 that works with the stock computer has this darker, almost black oval style connector. All right, and then on to what I was telling this other gentleman I would go over is this hose configuration. So here, this banjo bolt here is the top one on the rack, and then goes over, and there's another clamp there, and this particular thing that comes off the rack that's closer to the steering shaft, that used to come up, and I think it came around and beyond here. I think I had to cut it off right here so there was enough room to put this hose in, but I did that because it allows the fluid just to pass back and forth. I don't know if it helps to keep it cooler, lubricated, whatever the case may be, but this car has 245 Hankook RS4s on it, and even when they're hot and sticky and it's on a sticky track, this thing still steers with no problem. And I don't have just like a standard style steering wheel, nothing huge or whatever, so there's no reason for me to have power steering on this, because if you have power steering, it's normally bolted here, and then to do that, then that means you have to have the tensioner, the OEM tensioner, like right there, which means you also have idler right there, and it just makes this way more complicated. And again, longer belt that for whatever reason like $60 versus this thing's like $13. So this is just very simple. All right, so since we are here, I guess I'll show you guys my hood setup. Be patient with me for a sec. I'm kind of proud of this thing. I know it probably looks silly, but the thing is, I've seen many professional race teams with this type setup. So now I'm just using the stock hood because back when I did this, the rules said that you had to use all of the original stuff on the car. If you had added material, you had to add points. So I literally just trimmed the inside of the hood down and just folded it, and then folded the top down. And so the purpose of this is it literally draws all the hot air right through the radiator fan and then right up across the hood and gets the hot air out of the engine bay. But the other thing is, if the air had stayed in here and trapped, it would go under the car, creating lift. So this isn't really creating downforce, but I would say that it's probably helping to reduce lift as well as keep or get the hot air out of the engine bay. So anyway, if you like the video and have watched the others or whatever, please like and subscribe it, and then also hit the notification bell if you watch our race videos when we go live, so you can catch on and watch what we're doing. So and wish us luck. So thanks a lot and take care.